Welcome to, well, my world, baby. Because we all know I'm a little dark romance book talk girly. And worlds with men who have twisted devotion that'll burn everything down for you, well, that's my bread and butter, baby girl. So we're asking a very intense question today. One that has everyone in a Twitter. Is dark romance toxic? And more importantly, why do women love it? And this isn't just a question that the internet loves to argue about. Oh no. This is the thesis of my channel. The center of my existence, if you will. The driving force behind every part of my creative life. And with that, I think it's time for a trigger warning. If you think that all dark romance is toxic and abusive, if you do not understand our 2026 word of the year, nuance, if you don't understand that people need a place to play out their fantasies and have a playground to explore who they are as a person and talk about dark and intense situations, ideas, or things that they've gone through, if you don't understand that not all people heal from their trauma the same way and some people need an outlet, if you are someone who absolutely hates the idea of a woman owning her own sexuality, well, baby girl, how did you get here? Like, no, seriously. What did the algorithm do you dirty for? But if you love romance where men are obsessed with you, they cherish you, they're devoted to you, they would burn this fucking world down for you, and if you wanted to burn it yourself, well, baby, they would pour that gasoline and hand you a fucking match. Well, then you're in the right place, sweetheart. Now, for the actual trigger warnings, we're going to be talking about some heavy topics because dark romance deals with intense and dark situations and traumas and works through how those things work in the world and asks very deep and intense questions that make us question morals and humanity. So if you cannot handle any of those topics, this is not the video for you, and that's not me being sarcastic this time. Put your mental health first. But we're probably going to talk about any of the following things. I say probably because as I'm talking, they may come out passively as part of whatever story I'm referencing, and I won't even notice because I am so used to being in the dark romance space. Common tropes that people have problems with in dark romance tend to be SA or CSA, whether it's happening on the page or it's happened to a heroine or a hero in the past. Consensual, non-consensual, which is where people act out SA, but everyone is openly consenting to it in advance. Dubious consent, which also falls into that same arena where they did consent, but not with all the facts, or they were blackmailed, or there was some underlying thing that pushed that in. We'll be talking about age gaps. We'll be talking about crime lords and drugs and addiction. We'll probably also have to touch on DV because that is something that people often accuse people who are in DS relationships of. There's a laundry list of topics today. Now grab your cozy drink and relax, because I'm about to go a little deep. So imagine, ladies, with me if you will, a man, a god. He could be a Mafia don. He could be the king of all vampires. He could be a literal god. It doesn't matter. What matters is that no one could ever defeat this man. He has it all. He's the leader. He's the ruler. He's powerful. People quake in his steps. People fear being in his shadow. And there is literally nothing that he cannot achieve. And instead of fighting with you, he wants you to own you, to know you, to have you completely. But it isn't about force. No. This tyrant is so devoted and obsessed with you that he'll kneel for you and only you. Weak for you. Give up his power for you. Not because you're special to the rest of the world, but because you're special to him. And that, my friends, is just the start of why women love dark romance. And why, contrary to the popular beliefs and myths, it's not actually toxic. It isn't that women inherently want to be dominated, controlled, put in toxic situations where they just like the dark, evil, morally gray actions of a character. Oh, no. It's because most of our lives we have been the second choice, the given that's taken for granted. Men date not for themselves, but for other men. They want a woman who looks good on their arm. They want a woman who makes them feel more like a man. They want a woman who does things to help their lives be better. There's a reason why we all unanimously sing the song Labor. But just because we've never had something doesn't mean that we don't want it and that it's not our fantasy.
And I know what you're thinking. Bitch, what makes you qualified to talk about this? Well,
so if you're new here and you do not know me, my name is Katira O'Fray. I am a writer. I ranked in the top 100 in every genre for my first book when we did our December sale. Right now, the first book in my Gemstone Soul series is free on Amazon, and we've actually made it into the top 100 of every category, which as an author is insanely exciting, and I couldn't do that without readers like you. But it also means that there's so many new people who are getting to experience the world and fall in love with the same men that I fell in love with. You got Grant, the dominant, stoic, vampire, morally gray man. And then, Troy, the king of all vampires, who's waited 5,000 years to find you and make you his forever. And who doesn't want to fall in love with a villain? I'm glad to see that I'm not the only woman out there who would absolutely make a deal with a man to sell herself forever, and who would absolutely let the villain chase her down in her own house, tie her to her bed, and lick her kitty until she screams. I write spicy dark romance, particularly paranormal, and always sub-dom, because if you don't know, I'm a sub. And if you love dark romance, you should be too. But more importantly, I also have 10 years plus experience in the publishing world, both as an editor and as a writer. I also have 2 degrees that are in publishing. One is in English for writing and editorial. The other is in the actual business side of publication. And I also have a 3rd degree that was my first one in cultural anthropology, where I studied not only mythos, but the cultural interpretations around religion and around literature. If there's anyone out there who is prepared to talk dark romance rhetoric with you, well, baby girl, it's me. I'm that crazy dark romance book talk girly vampire simp. So here's the important thing that we need to talk about, though. There are a lot of myths that surround dark romance. And a lot of these myths come from how the specific characters who are the dark love interest interact in the world and interact with people. There are definitely some books out there that cross the line, in my opinion, and do fetishize abuse and SA and other things that are not good to fetishize. But the majority of those books do not cross that line. The important thing to note is that every reader has a different tolerance level, and if you're going to go into dark romance, you better be reading that trigger warning list. Because for some people, it's a really good basis for you to know if you're going to handle this book's topic. Well, for other people, it's a menu. And though not all dark romances come from a sub-dom state, or DS, which is dominant and submissive, a lot of people think that that is just BDSM, but BDSM is one type of dominant and submissive. That is something that I will talk about a lot because that is the lifestyle that I personally live and that I write. And it's also the overlying element in most dark romance, even if they don't call it that. Having a dominant male lead and a submissive female lead is the normal structure for 90% of dark romance. And when it's not, it's typically the female is the dominant and the male is submissive, or they are a same-sex couple, but they still have one dom, one sub. So the first thing that we need to talk about is, what is dark romance? Dark romance, which is often called a sub-genre of romance, but I would call it more of a parallel genre. Whereas the subgenres that you would normally think of are contemporary, paranormal, fantasy. Dark romance has its own contemporary, paranormal, dark fantasy. But for the sake of this video, we are going to call it a subgenre. Dark romance as a subgenre is a genre that focuses around morally gray characters, situational trauma, dark themes, or taboo subjects. And instead, dark romance is focused on asking very intense questions about the world and its morals. For example, what does it mean to love someone if they are fighting with a dark and uncontrollable urge inside of them. For example, if I were writing a character, like in my book, Arched Wing, Falcon's character is a half demon, and he has this overwhelming urge that often comes that he has very little control over, that turns him into a very dark character. And he has to fight against that urge to hurt other people, which he does do. But that resistance is something that we have to watch unfold and feel that trauma and that fear and that monster inside of him with him. So then the question becomes, how do you love someone and take care of them when you can't even control the urges you have in yourself? That is dark romance. Dark romance also has a spectrum. And the spectrum can go from something like a taboo, like Love in Deep Space, when we think of the main character and Caleb and how he is technically her adopted or stepbrother, and how he is come back as the Colonel and this controlling character, but he's still deeply in love with her. And then it can go all the way out to intense stalker yandere romance where the character literally kidnaps her and keeps her inside of a shed and ties her up until she decides that Stockholm Syndrome has won. Where a book falls on this spectrum is definitely going to determine how people feel about it and if people find it toxic. Because that last example, the far end of the spectrum, if he ends up realizing the mistake he made, changing, seeking to become a better person, letting her go, and she falls in love with him for who he is outside of that entire situation, that redemption arc takes it from toxic and abusive to just a villain redemption arc that we see happen to characters in mainstream fiction all the time. However, most people, if they're very unaware of dark romance or they have a very light skin, are not going to make it to the redemption part. They're just going to see the toxic part. And that is where the problem with dark romance starts. Because some readers don't understand it, and some writers don't know what the boundaries are. What is the driving purpose in dark romance? Well, the driving purpose in dark romance is to explore something that is taboo, dark, or inappropriate. Oftentimes, this is either because the author has a fantasy that they are wanting to explore, or because they are writing to market and their readers have a fantasy that they want to explore. To make this exploration of fantasy work, the dark main character needs to be obsessed. Fucking obsessed. Okay. This character, the love interest, needs to be the center of their entire world. They would do and say anything to own and possess this character. And I'm starting with own and possess because it doesn't start off as love. Even when they're fated mates, it should never ever start as love. There needs to be a buildup. There needs to be attention. There needs to be something that makes readers coming back. You need to have that feeling every chapter as you're moving closer. It's about to happen. The tension is building up. They're so close. They touch. Their skin is sizzling, and then something goes wrong and you don't have it and you just want to scream into your pillow and rip your hair out of your head. But you keep going. You keep going because you know in your bones that this man is going to get what he obsesses over. He is going to get her. And that's why we keep coming back. It's the Damon and Elena stringing us along for years at a time, having to watch that episodically once a week, and then taking summer off and screaming in my heart of hearts, oh my God, Elena, just fucking pick Damon. And that was my first experience with dark romance, Damon Salvatore, because he is obsessed with Elena. At first, he's obsessed with Elena because she looks like Catherine, but then he's obsessed with Elena because of who she is. And he will stop at nothing, including putting himself in a situation where he knows he can't have her because she's with Stefan, and he continues to torture himself and not feel good enough, but never step away because she needs him. Stefan is gone with Klaus at the beginning of season 3. And Damon stays by her side, even while they're desperately looking for Stefan. He protects her and shields her, even though he is sleeping with that news reporter, because he knows in his bones that the world will be broken and wrong if he does not protect this woman who has every inch of his heart.
Do you, need a cigarette, girl? I know you don't smoke, but do you need one?
And that's how you start it. That is how you start it. She, and I'm going to use he and she in this because the most common and reoccurring relationships are a man and a woman, where the man is the dominant and the woman is a submissive. However, as a bisexual girly myself, not every relationship in dark romance is that way, nor is every relationship I've ever published been that, because Kelly and Teddy, and then all of the men in the Gemstone Souls, just for the record. But I am going to say he and she a lot in this video because that's what 90% of you are going to end up reading. I don't want to exclude anyone. I'm just trying to not say a million things each time. Step 2 in the formula. There needs to be something special about her. And whatever it is that is special about her needs to be outside of the spectrum of the man. And when I say outside of the spectrum of the man, I mean it needs to be something that isn't him specifically being obsessed with her. We'll get to why later. A great example is the book Little Mouse by Emily Rose. In it, Nico, who is a Mafia Don in, I believe it was New York City, he finds a woman who he's not really sure why she is the way she is, why she's doing what she's doing. Something's off about her. She isn't acting like how he expects other women to act. So he kidnaps her. And it turns out that she is the daughter of one of his rivals that has been kept in hiding because they didn't want anyone to know that they had daughters. That makes her special to the story. Whereas Gia, she is not special. She's just the daughter of somebody who wants to sell her off to the highest bidder and has kept her in hiding and has been essentially beaten on a regular basis because nobody cares about her. And then this man kidnaps her. Okay? But what makes her special by the end isn't the station or reason that the world was giving. To the world, she's special because she is one of the only daughters of this specific crime family. But to Nico, she is special because she's her. Because he falls in love with her. And her power over him becomes his feelings for her. Now, at no point in this story does Emily soften Nico. He never stops being a tyrant. He never stops being morally gray. He never stops being a bad guy. And I fucking love that. Don't ever change, Emily. Do not ever change. Now that you've established obsession and specialness, the next phase in having a good dark romance is to set the stakes. And setting the stakes requires you doing something taboo. So, let's talk about being taboo. There are many, many different things to enjoy in the dark romance spectrum that fall into the line of being taboo. For me, some of the ones that I greatly enjoy are run, and if I catch you, I fuck you. The forced proximity. The age gap.
Editing kit here. And while we don't typically consider an age gap to be an age gap if it's paranormal or fantasy and he happens to be immortal or like an elf and live a really long time, but that is technically an age gap. And since I am a crazy vampire girl, clearly I like an age gap.
The father figure, pseudo step sibling romance. Think Caleb and the main character in Love and Deep Space. The tyrant who will kneel for only you. The corrupted king. The Mafia Don. The warlord in a dark fantasy. The man who kidnaps you. The man who stalks you. The man who will secretly murder anyone who lays a hand on you. These are all really common taboo archetypes for the dark romance. Personally, I love the paranormal side of things. I have dabbled in contemporary. It's not really my thing. I love to write paranormal, and I mostly read paranormal, fantasy, and sci-fi, but boy, boy, oh fucking boy, do I love a good Mafia Dawn. Which is funny because I am probably one of the goodest goody two-shoes girls you will ever meet. Like, yes, I have had alcohol, but I have never smoked a cigarette. I've never done drugs. I've never done anything illegal besides, like, when I didn't know that my friends were dining and dashing and I went with them. So it's funny that I would like Mafia Dons. That's not me. It's also funny that I like dark romance men because they do shit that I would never do. But I get to be a part of the fantasy. And that, my friends, is the next most important part of why dark romances are not technically toxic. So come with me, if you will, down a little rabbit hole that is called the fantasy. And if you are religious, I'm about to piss you the fuck off. So this is your warning. Dark romance is a fantasy fulfillment, and we're going to talk about why specifically non-consensual, consensual, and dubious consent are common features in dark romance, and why, well, they're the shit. So, for a little background context, I grew up in a Pentecostal cult. Not all Pentecostals are in a cult, but I was in one. I do not have great feelings about religion because of this. I also grew up in a town where everyone was either Pentecostal or Mormon, and in the next town over, they were either Pentecostal or Southern Baptist. So again, not a great relationship with Christian religions.
And yes, the irony is not lost on me that I am an atheist now and don't have a great relationship with religions. But my first degree was in studying religions and mythology, and I absolutely find them fascinating. I just don't ever want to be in one again.
Historically speaking, Christianity has been one of the most predominant religions that has existed in the Western culture. And whenever you look at literature throughout history, you can see the underlying effects of the Madonna whore principle.
I am sick right now, and I am going to kick past Katira's ass because she didn't explain. The Madonna whore principle is that there are only two types of women who can exist in the world. There is the Madonna, who is the beautiful, pure, virginal, going to be a wife and a mother and have lots of babies for her husband. And then there is the whore, who is seen as more demonic, who is usually depicted underneath a Madonna. In the original Madonna whore painting, she is literally underneath a Madonna. And she is the version of women who men think go out and have a lot of sex and only care about themselves and will never be a good wife or mother and aren't pure. And it's a representation of exactly how the church made essentially virtue into a fetishized and commoditized item, that we became an object instead of a person with our own thoughts, feelings, emotions, needs, desires, things that are all innately human, things that are allowed to happen for men. They're allowed to have their earthly desires, and it's just, oh, they sinned, they failed. But for women, it would destroy our entire persona and our worth and essentially the marketplace because we were not treated as humans. That is the Madonna whore complex.
In a lot of these very intense, high-demand religious situations, women's bodies are objectified in a very unique way. We're basically punished for what other men think of us. It's, oh, sister, seeing you in that fucking maxi skirt that went down to the ground was giving me unpure thoughts. So you need to work on being more conservative, more covered up, more modest is hottest. I was in a turtleneck, long sleeves, skirt down to the ground. The only way I could have been more covered is if I put a hood over my head. And I was 15, 14, 15, something in there. And he was 30 fucking 5. In a lot of these contexts, the only time that women are allowed to enjoy sex or want sex or have a sexuality is when it is in the act of performing for one's husband. So what happens is a lot of women who grow up in these high demand religions who do have a desire for sex and intimacy and closeness, we tend to start having fantasies.
And these fantasies are not the kind of fantasies that young men have where they're watching porn. These are more like, we know the only way that we can enjoy ourselves and still be religiously sound is if we are either married or it wasn't our choice.
A great example of this is during the 1970s and the 1980s. This was a time when women were still expected to be more pure in general, even though there was a big push for women to have more expression with their body, ironically, by Madonna. But during this time, this was the era of the bodice ripper. Those really trashy looking, but I absolutely love the covers, those really trashy looking romances that your parents used to read that nowadays you would want a discreet version of, where there's Fabio ripping the dress off of some woman. Think Leisure by Dorchester, which has gone out of business. Think the Time Swept series. Think back when Zebra and Dell were publishing a lot more risque stuff. Think back before Harlequin was super tame. That is the era of what happens when a bunch of women get repressed.
Which means that this gave birth to a lot of forced arranged marriage tropes, where someone was being sold into a marriage or their body was being sold against their will to someone because they could have that fantasy of the super hot guy that they now spend forever with. Or you get the run and if I catch you, I fuck you kind of vibes, where it's non-consensual, but it is consensual. Or you get the dubious consent, blackmail, ownership, being tied up or pinned down and made to want it. These are fantasies that we would have because we knew that if we didn't incite it, it therefore was not our fault. And if it wasn't our fault, then that meant that we were allowed to have that thought or fantasy. Now, granted, in practicality, that it's not your fault is not always true. I went through CSA as a child, and my pastor used to say all the time that, not every pastor, but the first one, used to say all the time that 5-year-old me was a seductress and that I was going to go to hell for all eternity because I was tempting adult men. It's also important in those situations to talk about how age gaps will often play into that, and they also play into the idea of having daddy issues. There is a very specific connotation that goes with the term daddy issue. Not everyone who has a daddy issue is someone who didn't have a father in their life or had a very toxic father. There are also people out there whose fathers were just emotionally distant from them, and it made them want someone who was more of the caregiver, protector, worship you kind of dominance. They want that person to fulfill the role of what their father should have been because their father just wasn't enough of an emotional outlet for them. And that happens to be an incredibly common scenario, at least in the United States, because of the way that our gender society tends to work. Our gender norm for men is that they shouldn't be showing emotion. They should be more callous, cut it off, more masculine, man up, be tough. And this trickles down to them not having close and deep relationships with their daughters. So their daughters want to have that. And sometimes that will manifest in being attracted to an older man who can take care of them and provide for them, not just in a physical sense, but in an emotional sense, the way that they wish their father had. I personally am a victim of the daddy issue department. My biological father was the person who did the horrible CSA I spoke of before. And my stepdad, who I just called dad, by the way. So if I ever just say dad, I'm talking about my stepdad. He loved me very much. He would give me anything I wanted. He thinks I hung the moon. I say daddy and I get whatever I want. But he was struggling with addiction during a lot of my adolescence.
I just also wanted to add that he has been completely sober since 2010. So cheers on that. That is amazing progress. And I'm really proud of him.
And that meant that it was on and off, whether he was living in my life or whether he wasn't at home with us. And that really impacted how I feel, and it impacted what kind of men I chose to date in my life. And it impacted that I ended up with someone who is older than me and is a worship dom. He's not ridiculously older than me. That isn't to say that I have never dated men who weren't older than me. I don't talk about it very often because of some very dark things that happened during that relationship. But when I was 18, and from 18 to 20, off and on, I was poly. For the record, I was poly. But one of the men that I was dating was 39 when I met him, and he absolutely took advantage of the situation and how young I was to convince me that the way to find affection and attention and was to do and say and be things that I wasn't very comfortable with. But I'd already been programmed by the cult I grew up in that it was very easy for him to manipulate that situation. And looking back on it now as someone who is in her 30s, I'm like, ew. If I see an 18-year-old now, I'm like, you're a child. You are a child. Like, you're not technically a child. Like, legally, you're an adult. You can watch my content. But I wouldn't date you because I'd be like, I could have a child your age. Like, I had a miscarriage at 16. I could have a child your age. No, thank you. But I love it in books. I just don't love it in real life. The other fantasies that you see oftentimes when they aren't a man who owns you or controls you, which force proximity, kidnapping, stalking, or someone who can be your defender, protector, father figure, is going to fall into the pseudo, I can't say this word, so I'm going to say a similar word, pseudo impress, like step siblings or adopted siblings, like again, Caleb in Love Deep Space. So those situations are, you're still looking for that same kind of emotional connection and validation and protection that you would in a father figure situation, but you're looking for it in like this is my older brother and he cares about me and takes care of me and has a great relationship with me. Like, it's the idea that someone can be as close to you as your sibling is, but it not really be your sibling. You know what I mean? And the actually making them step or adopted is what takes it from a best friend, normal, secure romance to a dark romance. And this can also manifest in ways that don't have to do with being related. For example, in the third book in my series, Gemstone Souls, Infinity's Awakening, Cedric grew up with Kelly and they grew up in the same household as if they were siblings, the way that you would see the Flash grow up with Iris. So Barry and Iris's relationship, where they're not related at all, but they grew up like they were. And her relationship with the new love interest in that book, we don't want to spoil it, but the new love interest in that book, when he gets his memories back, found out that he raised her. So, like, as her father. It was very clear that he had no romantic feelings for her when that happened. He doesn't even remember that until after he meets her again and falls for her. But that pseudo impress is still there. And that becomes the question of, can you love someone if you find out that they were a completely different piece of your life that you're not comfortable with them being? See how it always comes to a question. When I talk about a character in that book having to deal with being possessed by a god that makes him do some very unforgivable things, that over the course of several books he's attempting to get redemption from, but he owns up to what it was that happened even though he didn't have control. That's the question of, if somebody abuses you and hurts you, can you ever forgive them and love them again? If you hurt and abuse someone, can you ever earn redemption? Can you ever actually be sorry, mean it, and change? Everything comes down to a fantasy that fulfills a woman's specific question. So baby, let's ask some questions. The point in which dark romance tends to become considered toxic or abusive comes down to the questions that are being asked. Because sometimes those questions are dark and deep and intrinsic in a very, very specific way. When you think about the fact that a character can kill someone who is really important to the main character and then them forgive them and still love them, that asks the question, what can love forgive? Think about Damon turning Elena's real mother. Think about, in my book, Troy killing Kelly's fake father. These are all scenarios where something absolutely unforgivable in the real world happens. And because it would be unforgivable in the real world, that then makes people who aren't looking for the answer to that intrinsic question stop and go, oh, no, that's fucked up. That's fucked up. But it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be a dark situation. Now let's talk about dark romance being a playground. And when I say that dark romance is a playground, I mean it's a place for people to experiment with things that they would want to try in the real world or that they are turned on by, but that they don't actually want to risk doing in the real world, because what if they end up not liking it? What if they end up doing it wrong? What if they get hurt doing it? What if they do it with the wrong person? So this is a great place for people to explore those more spicy elements. This applies specifically to spicy romance, but it gives people the opportunity to play around with the idea of things that they would want to do. It's one thing to watch 40 TikTok videos in a row where somebody has on a ghost mask. It's another to actually want someone in said ghost mask to tie you up and run a fake knife up and down your body, or even a real knife cutting your clothes off, and then until you can't walk straight. Like, you see what I mean? Because what if that person that you select for this scene is not safe? And I say this as someone who, it took me a very long time to find a dom who was safe. There are a lot of very toxic men out there who think that they're a dom, and a lot of them like to tell other men how to be a dom, and they do it wrong, but they're not. They're just wanting to control and abuse and degrade women, and it can be really hard to tell right off the bat. That's why my best piece of advice for you is, if you want to have a sub-dom relationship, that you should not have intimacy with the person who will be your dom until you have known them for at least a month. I would say no sex for at least a month, and then no kinky sex for at least 3, because in my experience, men can't hold being fake for longer than 3 months unless they're a genuine narcissist. That's just my years of experience and mistakes have taught me. And it sucks because I am I want to do it on the first date kind of girl. So, so there's that. So I have made this mistake too many times. I am like Astarion in that I have to have been physical with someone before I am even able to feel romantic about them. But that does not end well. So if you are not like that, I highly, highly, highly suggest you wait. I lucked out because I ended up with someone who was my friend. And when we met, he wasn't super aggressive or anything. He asked if he could kiss me. No one had ever asked before. Like, everyone just assumed that because I was in the room with them as a breathing human being, even if we were in the middle of a fucking bar full of people, that they could just grab me and kiss me, that they could just do whatever they wanted and I would be okay with it. And he didn't. He was like, he used my real name, but he was like, can I kiss you? And I was just like, oh. My heart stopped, and he was like, and I went, yeah. And then he was like, are you sure? You don't sound sure. And I knew right then and right there, I'm gonna marry that one, because no one has ever checked in with me. No one has ever given me the red light, green light, yellow light moment unless I demanded it after they'd already started doing whatever they wanted. But he didn't. He asked. Now, that's not to say that he doesn't like ask me to beg or any of those things that I like, but consent is his thing. I just went off on a tangent. I'm sorry, but I love my husband. I'm not sorry that I love my husband. I'm sorry that I went off on a tangent about loving my husband. But I think that all plays into this entire idea, because the thing that is the fantasy that we're looking for as women is consent. We want to feel like we have control in the situation. I know for me, one of the things that pushes me forward when it comes to dark romance is I want to relive a situation in which control or autonomy was taken away from me and give myself back control and autonomy in that situation. That's why I'm a sub. Not everyone is. Some people will become a dom as their response to going through SA trauma. Mine was to become a sub, and where I feel like I have power because I can say yes or no, so I can relive anything I went through. I can have control in that situation, and it's like I'm rewriting history, which is why I tend to enjoy non-consenting consent or dubious consent, because those are things that make me feel like I'm reliving that situation. Whereas those are not safe things to try in real life with 99% of the population. So having them in a book is something that is incredibly healing. Now, it is important to talk about the line, because there is a line that can be crossed. Where we cross the line in dark romance is when the writer does not put boundaries and safeguards in place to ensure that their character is still consent forward in some way, shape, or form, even if that consent is dubious, and that their character is not acting with the intent of harm. And I will say, there are some authors who have moments in their books where I feel like they cross the line, and I can still love and appreciate those authors. My favorite author is Sadie Kincaid, and in her book Dante, there is actually a moment where the main character, Kat, which this was incredibly rough for me in this moment when it happened, because that is my actual real name. The character Kat is pregnant, and she is having some serious medical issues around that. And the character Dante decides to grab her by the throat and choke her to a point where his sister has to stop him so he doesn't kill her. I wasn't okay with that. I was really, really, really not okay with that. I was okay with him kidnapping her. I was okay with them talking about some really dark and difficult situations where she had gone through really extremely violent group SA in her past. I was okay with him forcing the two people who were her attacker to SA each other and then kill each other on page. I was not okay with him hurting the main female character intentionally while being her romantic interest.
Editing Gadira. It bothers me so much when a main character hurts their love interest, like intentionally in a way that is very DV related. That even in my third book, when I had the villain become the main love interest who had been incredibly violent, I created the rule that werewolf mates can't hurt each other, so that when he would eventually become the love interest, he would have already been able to not hurt her and have a chance to redeem himself from being very aggressive and violent towards every main character in the past, because it bothers me that deeply.
If they had been enemies and he had choked her while they were enemies, I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that. But while they're love interests, that crosses into the line of fetishizing abuse, in my opinion. And that's the whole point of sharing this, because it's my opinion. That might not be a different reader's line. So that's where the trouble with dark romance comes in, is that the intent behind a scene is also open to the interpretation of the reader. So it's not for everyone. Not everyone is going to be the right audience for a dark romance. But there are definitely some writers out there who I have put their books down because from page 1, it's considered romantic. Like, he slaps her and she's like, it's just so hot when he gets so angry and passionate about. No. That's a line that everyone is like, no. That is fetishizing. What falls into the spectrum of dark romance is, again, very, very wide. And a character can be a dark romance character without the whole story being dark romance. And I say this because The Vampire Diaries is a really great example of this. The Vampire Diaries as a show is paranormal, and paranormal things are a little darker than any other genre in romance. But it's not a dark show. It's not a dark show. It has some like typical spooky, edgy themes. It is not dark. It is not horror. It is not trying to push boundaries. It is not crossing any lines into extreme taboos. That's not its deal. However, there are several dark romances within the Vampire Diaries. And I would argue that the originals is a dark romance. Specifically the originals. But the Vampire Diaries, Damon Salvatore is a perfect map for a morally gray character who has a dark romance. He is obsessed with Catherine and Elena. He does things like murder the first history teacher so that he can prove to Stefan that he's actually not becoming soft and gentle, because he's got like this need to feel like he's the villain, because he is struggling with coming to terms with everything that happened in their past and blaming Stefan for those things and feeling like he wasn't good enough because Catherine was really in love with Stefan and he was just along for the ride, but he was actually the one in love with her and he never had to be compelled to be with her. Can you tell I love this character? Now, he, after killing the character, he then, and not Alaric, the one that was before Alaric, the reason Alaric joins the show. After killing this character, he then goes to Elena's house and we see him during Stefan's voiceover about if he thinks Damon can change and now he thinks he can't change. Damon has this moment where he's so soft and he just like runs his hand down the side of Elena's sleeping face and curls her hair. And it's just, he clearly cares so deeply for Elena, and he's obsessed with Catherine in this idea that, it feels so weird to say my name. He is obsessed with, every time I say my name, Shay looks over at me and she's like, Mommy, why are you saying your name? He is obsessed with this character to a point where it's not romantic anymore. He wants her to prove that he can have her. He wants her because he didn't have her. He wants her because he wants to know beyond a shadow of a doubt that she would pick him and not Stefan. He wants to be wrong about what he experienced in the past. He wants to be wrong about what he experienced in the past. However, during this entire situation, even like just the second episode in, Damon is already building this rapport with Elena and he already has feelings for Elena. By the time he's trying to break them up, he is no longer just trying to torture his brother, he actually cares about her. Which is why when later in season 1 they trick him about the Gilbert journal, he takes it personally. He's like, I expected this from you, to Stefan. And then he looks at Elena and he goes, but you, that was a disappointment. Because he trusts her and he cares about her and he loves her. And that dichotomy of this very morally gray character who does whatever he wants to do, he is going to go out and be evil. He's the antagonist of season 1. He will kill people without a second thought. Everyone is expendable and disposable unless you are in his inner circle. If you make it into his inner circle, you will matter to him forever. And I say make it in because he was more than ready to kill Caroline on multiple times throughout season 1 when he was using her and manipulating her and controlling her mind and sleeping with her under compulsion when she really didn't have a say. But when she becomes a vampire and she earns her place in their group, she becomes someone that he's willing to fight for and protect because she earned a place in his heart and in his group. That is a classic dark romance character. That is the tyrant who will kneel for only one person. And at the same time, the same thing can be said about Klaus and can be said about Elijah. Klaus is a character. His relationship with Caroline is the classic dark romance of forcing this person to love you back by doing these evil and horrible things and cutting them off from the other people in their world so you're their only choice. I loved that entire arc. I liked him being with Caroline more than I liked the romance that he has in the originals. Now, why I say that Elijah is actually a dark romance is because his relationship is based in restraint that is not his choice. And that restraint is less about the fact that he's not in love with her and more about the fact that he does not want to take away from his brother because he thinks that his brother becoming a father will actually change his world and his life. And I love the dichotomy that Elijah is willing to do whatever it takes, that he's willing to break his own morals. He's willing to kill anyone that he has to kill, do anything he has to do. He would even burn the world down for her. But he's not willing to give himself at first. So when they finally do become a couple, it's like this entire tension explosion in your chest. He is the light side of dark romance. He is the, I am a character who does dark things, but I do them for the right reasons. He's the Grant Gordon from My Gemstone Souls. He is the Spawn Astarion from Baldur's Gate 3. A bad character who can be evil, but who isn't dark enough for it to be unsettling to 90% of viewers. Damon Salvatore sits in the classic middle ground, most common dark romance character, the morally gray character who everyone is like, oh, he's a bad guy, he did bad things, but he's so hot and I love him anyway. Other characters who would fit into that spectrum would be Loki from the Marvel Cinematic Universe, would be Jace Wayland during the seasons and part of the book where he's actually joined the darker side of things. This would be where I would say the majority of my darker characters within books are ultimately going to set, like Falcon and Arched Wing. And then we have the far side. And this is the side where characters do absolutely unspeakable things, cross every line that one should not cross, and still manage to receive a redemption arc of some kind that makes them a lovable character. I would say this is where Troy and My Gemstone Souls series sits. This is also where Klaus Mikaelson from the Vampire Diaries and Originals would sit. This is where I would say Ascended Astarion sits, because let's face it, he's definitely more of a villain as Ascended Astarion, and in some people's opinion has done absolutely unspeakable things. But hey, if you ascended him, you did them too, so get the fuck over yourself. The important thing to make sure that your dark romance does not become toxic is that you have a balance for where your man sits on that spectrum. So if your character is at the very light end of the spectrum, then that means that the actions they take that are dark need to be on the lighter side of the spectrum. So they can kill characters, but they need to do it for a morally sound reason, like protecting their family or the woman that they love. And they can do different crimes or be a more morally ambiguous character leaning towards morally gray. But those things need to be resolved. Or like with Grant Gordon, in my book, he's cursed and he has to commit unforgivable sins once every full moon. And he feels like he has this monster inside of him. So for him, his redemption is that when he's not having a moment as being a monster, he heavily resists any vampiric urges that he has. And that exonerates him of the darkness that he has in him. Whereas if you're on the farthest side of the spectrum, you have to do a lot more to redeem that character. And I would suggest when you're on the farthest side of the spectrum, rather than redeeming the character by making them heroic, which is something you could do to someone who's on the light end, is you need to make them a good person and a safe person for their love interest. Just their love interest. Because if you try to fully heal and repair this character, it won't work. It will feel unearned. So if you think about Ascended Astarion, you don't want to turn him into someone who is going to suddenly decide that he wants to save Baldur's Gate and give everyone freedom and turn any spawn he makes into a true vampire and start a bunch of charity programs and donate money to everyone and become an adventurer who goes around like a mercenary saving the world. That would no, it's not believable. It's not believable, and you would have to do a whole hell of a lot of work to get to that point. But what you can do is make him so hopelessly in love with his dark consort that he would give them the entire world. They're his treasure. They're the only thing that matters to him. He would lose his mind, his sanity, his strength, his everything if they left. That they are what he eats, lives, sleeps, breathes. Every choice he makes is about what is going to give them what they want. He would give them the world on a pedestal. He would burn the entire world to the ground to defend them. That is believable. That reaction to devotion is believable because he's still evil in it. It's still selfish. He's doing it for his person, right? It's like in the Gemstone Souls, I don't stop Troy from being the villain at any point in time in the series, but I make it so that he's willing to kneel for Kelly. He would be willing to give up his goals and aspirations and desires, his entire point in the plot, to protect her and save her, because she is more important to him than anything else. But if she's not requiring that, he's still going to go after it. He's still going to do the bad things. He's still going to kill the peoples. He's still going to want to be a tyrant. He's still going to want to rule the world. He's still the warlord. He's still the god of all vampires. He still thinks of every other person who isn't in his inner circle as disposable. Whereas if someone is in the middle, it's a lot easier to decide how you want to go about redeeming them. I would say Damon is an example of redeeming a character without ever 100% making them a hero. He still makes really selfish, toxic, and unhinged decisions. And Loki is a great example of redeeming a character like that by turning them into the hero. Whether it's the Loki that dies in Endgame, or it's the Loki who's the variant that we all fell in love with in season 1 of Loki. He will always end up being the hero. And it works because he's in the middle. Now, one of the issues that people run into with dark romance is they don't make it to the exoneration. They don't finish the arc. So what they see is typically what they see is someone who's on this end of the spectrum, and they don't see it through to the point where that person becomes safe for the love interest character. And typically you will see people screaming this person is toxic or abusive when they're enemies to lovers. Whereas a lot of people who see this end of the spectrum, this is still dark, but they're not truly evil, they don't realize that that's a dark romance a lot of the time, unless the words dark romance are inside of the title. Another issue that I have is a lot of times people will label something as dark romance when in reality it's actually a horror romance or a torture corn. Spicy short, because I can't say the erotica word. It's not. Horror romance is its own thing. I love it. I have a book series I'm working on that is a horror romance. Very Hellraiser kind of vibes. I love that. I absolutely love that. One of my projects that I worked on when I was in college that was like a shorter book series I did was called A Flesh in Darkness and the Eloquence of Agony. And they were softcore inspired by every body horror that I'd ever loved. And the main character ends up becoming like them. And the main male character, he ends up giving up being like them. So they switch places. And I digress. That is its own genre, and it is not dark romance, and it is meant to be low-key, physically horrific. And horrific things are, say it with me, actually abusive to a person. So when you're doing anything that falls into the body horror genre, that's not romance. It's not dark romance. That is horror romance. And if you're actively torturing people in it, that's torture porn. And I have definitely purchased a book before thinking that I was in for a fun, sexy, dark romance romp, and it was really intense, torture porn, horror romance written by a man. And the fact that it was written by a man should tell you exactly how my reaction as someone who participates in BDSM should tell you just how not okay this book was. This book is no longer available for sale. Amazon took it down for violating its terms of services. But there's a difference. Do not be looping them together. If you are an author, you mark it correctly. It is your responsibility to mark it correctly. And if you are a reader, don't assume that those two things are the same thing. Do not see the words dark romance and assume that every single solitary romance is going to be horrific and toxic and abusive, okay? Now, I do think that it is important to note with all of this that although we've talked about today how dark romance is not glorifying abuse and is not toxic as a whole, that there are exceptions to that rule. There are people who cross the line. But the most important thing to talk about is that it really comes down to the reader. If the reader is not able to handle things that would trigger them or give them trauma responses, then this is traumatic and abusive to them. And they should not be reading it. That is why we need to have trigger warnings, because some people just should not be reading certain things. But I also want to remind you, it's not an author's responsibility to dilute or water down their intense topics for your comfort level. If you can't meet the book where it's at, don't buy it.
Yeah, bitch, I said what I said.
And I will die on that fucking hill. If it's not for you, it's not for you. I will die on that fucking hill. Not every piece of art is for everyone. So if this is a format that you really enjoy and you want to see more of my face on camera talking in combination with my normal essay style, let me know down in the comments below. Hitting that like button or that share button, that lets me know that this is the kind of content that you want to keep seeing and that I should keep making it for you. Because unfortunately, unlike my paranormal romance characters, I can't read your mind. I know, shock, huh? Shocker. And as always, if you want more videos like this, the most common thing to do, subscribe. And with that, thank you for being here today. Because writing, that's my passion. And with subscribers like you, I get to explore that passion. And I hope that I'll see you in the next one. So good night, darling. Okay. Do you have to lick your ass while I'm talking about sex? What is it with dogs?